Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where our job is to help you build visibility, professional credibility, and connection with your ideal client by putting the human at the center of innovative marketing, so you can build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship with your ideal clients. I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz, and I'm honored that you're here with me. If you haven't joined our wonderful marketing transformation community yet, go to innovabiz.co and collect your free gift as well. Do subscribe to the show and also leave a review because it helps others find us. Let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
We all tell ourselves stories about ourselves. The challenge with people with imposter syndrome is that the story is not an accurate story. This question of, I'm not good enough, I don't belong, I was just lucky to be here, someone made a mistake. So it's saying to you, own your accomplishments, identify and internalize your strengths, recognize that you are someone that has particular talent to contribute to the world, and you have the self-efficacy to really control your path.
Welcome back. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. If you haven't yet listened to my recent conversations with Jamie J of Bottleneck Virtual Assistants and with Jonathan Green of Serve No Master, then do check them out after you've listened to today's conversation, of course. I'm really excited today to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest, Dr. Richard Orbe-Austin, who's an executive coach and licensed psychologist with a focus on leadership development, career advancement, and diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. He's a co-founder and partner of Dynamic Transitions Psychological Consulting, a career and executive coaching consultancy. He's also been a keynote speaker and invited presenter at various conferences and meetings and consults to academic institutions. He's the co-author of the recently published book Own Your Greatness, Overcome Impostor Syndrome, Beat Self-Doubt and Succeed in Life, which he co-authored with his partner, Dr. Lisa Orbe-Austin. The goal of the book is to provide a systematic formula for eliminating imposter syndrome and to assist readers to own their talents and power in order to fully realize their goals and to lead a more balanced life. In our discussion today, Richard talked to me about how many of our negative thoughts are automatic and how we can interrupt the patterns. We talked about how we can give ourselves positive feedback, and Richard explained his 3 C's framework of clarify, what's the imposter origin story, choose an alternative scenario, and create new opportunities. Without further ado, then let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Richard Orbe-Austin. Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today from New York in the USA, Richard Orbe-Austin, who's a psychologist, an executive coach, a diversity, equity and inclusion consultant, an anti-racism expert, an author, a TEDx speaker, and his latest book with his wife Lisa is called Own Your Greatness, Overcome Impostor Syndrome, Beat Self-Doubt and Succeed in Life. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Richard. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you so much, Jürgen, for inviting me on. I'm so thrilled to be talking with you today.
Now, I was just telling Richard before we started the recording that I've been working my way through his book, Own Your Greatness, and it's all about imposter syndrome. We'll get to talk about that in a moment, but there's lots of checklists and a lot of work that you're prompted to do on yourself in the book. And the checklists, I was going through the early stages of recognizing where imposter syndrome is impacting your life, and I was thinking, oh, tick, 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 tick. Yep.
Right.
Yeah. So where did you come up with the approach to Well, I guess take us a step back, and how did you become interested from the days you were a practicing psychologist to focused on imposter syndrome and come up with this approach?
Sure. So, I typically tell the origin story of how we got our practice started. So, my wife and I own Dynamic Transition Psychological Consulting together. And we're both psychologists. And when we first started, this is our 13th year in business, we thought we would just do standard therapy. As we went through our training, we recognized that, yes, definitely, we wanted to focus in on that. So, I always had a dream to own my own practice. And we launched in 2007, right before the 2008 crash. So you can
Mm,
imagine it was challenging times. So we launched with a great deal of enthusiasm, waited for the clients to flood in, and then the crash happened. And luckily for us at the time, we did therapy, but we also did career and executive coaching. I always had an interest in career development because of the fact that it is such a part of our identity that's not so much explored in the ways that we would want it to be. So we were able to really recognize during the crisis that our therapy clients dried up, but our career coaching, executive coaching clients remained. And what we recognized at the time is that therapy in economically challenging times was a luxury for people, but the career coaching was not, and the executive coaching was not. And so we really were able to build a practice that focused on development in all ways, shapes, and forms. And during the course of that time, we really started working with executive senior leaders, entrepreneurs who were struggling to feel that they would reach their level of success that they wanted and desired. And as we continued to see the same types of challenges, we came to recognize that it was imposter syndrome many of them were struggling with. So, this lack of confidence, this concern they were a fraud, this ability to feel like they are going to be exposed if they move up the ranks, made us realize that this is a key issue. And so we had an opportunity about a year and a half ago. We were approached by a publisher who said, "Hey, we've seen your work around imposter syndrome and we're interested to work with you on a book." And we took the opportunity to develop this model based on both research and our experiences working with our clients. And so when we talk about the model being research informed as well as clinically informed, that is the case.
mm. Yeah, that's an interesting story, and I started my business in 2007, so I certainly feel the pain when you
Right.
talk about the crash
Right.
in 2008, just as you're getting on your feet, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden business dries up. So, well done on that pivot, because I think there was clearly a need there for lots of people to do career transitioning and start new careers. Now, one of the things, you talk about career. One of the things that struck a chord with me as I was going through the book was reflecting back on my career. And I've done lots of work around my own mindset and, the imposter syndrome and that voice in my head that often comes up and says, "Hey, who are you to be talking to this fantastic psychologist today? You're not good enough to have this
Right.
conversation." And so I know how to deal with it. I've got some strategies of how to deal with that, but I've also tracked, the origin of my problem back to early childhood and some of the things that happened there.
Mm,
But going through your book, it highlighted a lot of other things, and I realized, oh my God, that was another trigger, a big trigger moment for me. A bad boss,
hmm
um, or having achieved a lot in my career but not gotten the promotion. Somebody else actually got the promotion and took credit for the work I did because I wasn't promoting myself enough. I kind of stood back and didn't
hmm
actively take credit for that. So there's a lot of those steps there. So that's great. So I love the 3 C's model you came up with. So just explain to us a little bit how that came about and explain the framework for us, because I think that's really powerful.
Sure. So when we were thinking about writing a book, we didn't want it to be so academic. We were really trained to be researchers and to work in an academic style, but we wanted it to be accessible to everyone. So we felt that making it a workbook would make it accessible. And when we thought about making a workbook, we thought we needed a model, we needed a frame that would make it easier for the reader to understand and to apply to their everyday life. So we came up with this concept of the 3 C's. So the 3 C's stands for clarify, choose, and create. And it's really a 3 phase, 9 step model that really looks at how you can overcome imposter syndrome. And one of the things when we talk about clarify, to your point, the first thing we talk about is clarifying your imposter syndrome origin story. So, as you talked about recognizing that some of these things come from childhood, being able to take you back to understand, well, where were some of these feelings? Where were some of these particular concepts that I had of myself come from? And oftentimes it does come from childhood, uh, family of origin, caretaker of origin, not necessarily in means of trying to blame someone, but to say, if you were identified as the smart one, but then you made a mistake at some point, you may feel like, well, maybe I'm an imposter, maybe I'm not as smart as everyone says I am. Or if you were identified not necessarily as a smart one, you were the more socially adept one, someone else in the family was viewed as a smart one. Even if you did just as well academically, you were never able to shake that notion that, well, maybe I'm just not good enough and I'm not smart enough because I'm just a socially adept one. And then part of the process of clarifying that we recognize in terms of the origin story is that there was a third particular path that was not necessarily in the research, but we saw it through our own work with clients. Is this situation where you may have been neglected as a child and everything for you was about survival. You never were able to get feedback to really assess your strengths. So everything you did was simply about being able to survive. So being able to be in the clarify step is first thinking about your origin story, and then really being able to know your triggers, as you said, whether it's a bad boss, whether it's being able to know that a new job, an unfamiliar project will trigger the imposter syndrome for you and make you feel like, well, maybe this is the point in time that I'm now going to be exposed. So being able to clarify that and then being able ultimately to recognize, well, what is the story I tell myself? What is the narrative that I construct that's not accurate about me? Whether it's, oh, I'm just lucky to be here, someone made a mistake. So that's clarify. Choose, though, gets you into the piece that I talk about with imposter syndrome is that it is a silent barrier. So we talk about speaking your truth, being able to really say that you have imposter syndrome. 70% of the population has discussed having imposter syndrome. But oftentimes, because a good deal of people who experience it are highly successful, they are ashamed to talk about it. But by speaking about it, you then free yourself to see that other people, role models, friends, colleagues also have that situation. And so we talk about you being able to go into that choose frame and working it through, being able to know what your automatic negative thoughts are related to that. So whether you say, oh, I'm stupid, or everyone thinks I'm stupid, labeling, mind reading. And then we really then talk you through how to silence those automatic negative thoughts and really get to the next phase of the work. And then finally, when we get to create, we talk about you being able to experiment with new roles. People with imposter syndrome tend to be people who like to be helpers, but don't like to ask for help because they feel they'll be exposed. Then it's finding a dream team, being able to work with people who really help you to know and understand that you are someone with talent, mentors, cheerleaders. And finally, looking at the conditions for your optimal performance, being able to really feel like you understand what the triggers are, what your barriers are, what your automatic negative thoughts are, to really get to the other side of minimizing and defeating imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I love the model, and there's so much in there to unpack and work through. I was curious, the first step, I mean, for a moment there, I thought, oh, this is taking me back into a little bit of trauma here. And if I hadn't have done a lot of work on some of those things myself in the past, I thought, this could be a bit risky. But then you actually turned it around at that point where I started thinking that. You turned it around and made it really clear that I had to own this, and I had to take the responsibility for, the self-awareness that I was getting now and move forward from there. So talk to us a little bit about that whole thing of, we can find an origin story, but there's a big risk of saying, well, my parents are to blame because they never gave me the attention that I was I was seeking, or they treated me as the less intelligent one in the family, or whatever
Right.
the story is. But talk to us a little bit about how you move beyond that. Well, the blame part, and you did allude to it there
Yeah,
when you
and
were describing the framework.
right. And I think that that's a great question because ultimately, as I said, the origin story is not to blame anyone. And what we've gotten feedback about is when people do the book, that piece is really triggering for them, right? Because it does take them back to rather
Mm,
challenging time periods. But we wanted it to be a point of reference for them to understand where it came from, but then to give people the feeling that they have the power to change the story, right? And to really have a different way of being able to move in the world. Because we all tell ourselves stories about ourselves. The challenge with people with imposter syndrome is that the story is not an accurate story. This question of, I'm not good enough, I don't belong, I was just lucky to be here, someone made a mistake. So it's saying to you, own your accomplishments, identify and internalize your strengths, recognize that you are someone that has particular talent to contribute to the world, and you have the self-efficacy to really control your path.
mm. What are some of the things people can do to build that kind of self-awareness, build the, what are my strengths, what are my superpowers, and at the same time also have the humility to say, well, there's stuff there that I can work on to improve and grow. And I'm thinking that, there's so much stuff that we take for granted that we do, that we think, I do something almost semi-automatically. It's so trivial. If somebody's standing next to me when I do that, they say, "Oh, what did you do there? That's brilliant." And I think, "Oh, it's nothing." So how do we get that awareness and place some value on those things that we maybe take for granted ourselves, and at the same time balance that with humility so that we can take on board opportunities for growth?
Sure. So one of the things that I oftentimes talk about is really getting feedback from people who know you and care about you. So asking them that question, like one of the hardest things for people with imposter syndrome to do is to answer this question of what are your accomplishments? Because they will look at you blankly and say, I don't have any. And to your point, you will feel like, well, an accomplishment has to be something like winning the Nobel Peace Prize or,
Yeah.
curing cancer, right? Like, just the simple everyday things. Launching a podcast is an accomplishment. Being able to kind of maintain a business is an accomplishment. So being able to talk to someone around you and say, hey, like if you were thinking about, some of my accomplishments, some of my strengths, what would you say to me? And not necessarily dismissing it by saying, oh, they just, they love me. So that's why they told me that. Really
Mm,
being able to take that in to allow you to honor that at a space and a place to understand that those unique strengths you want to leverage. That, yes, we all have areas for growth. And the challenge for people in the imposter syndrome is that perfectionism can take hold and they feel like nothing is an accomplishment unless it is perfect. So even if you did a great project, someone says, great job. And they will say, well, I messed up that one slide or I did this and
yeah.
and so you ruminate on that, right? Rather than saying the takeaway is people loved the presentation. It made the impact we wanted. We got the sale. We moved forward with the project. So being able to take stock of some of the things that you've done and take an inventory of it, write it down, keep it in a journal, get that feedback, and continue to explore that.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. My business coach has a rule that if you do, for example, the story about the presentation. If you do a presentation, and she's there, she'll give feedback immediately after the presentation, and all the feedback will be all the things you did well. And she said, and you're not allowed to think about anything that you didn't do well until this time tomorrow.
Hmm.
Until then, focus on these things because this went really well, this went really well, this went really well. Focus on that.
That's a great piece of advice because the human mind is such as we go immediately to what we did wrong, right? And I
Mm,
I take the follow the same type of advice I give to my clients if we go through a process and I ask them, well, what did you do well? And they immediately want to go to, well, I did this, I didn't do this well. And I stop them and say,
mm,
what did you do well? Let's stay on that for a moment. And then we can come back to the areas for growth and development, sure, but let's leverage and take some time to appreciate the strengths.
Hmm. And one of the other things I think that this highlights is we don't take the time to celebrate our successes generally as humans, right? And
Right.
and that plays into that imposter syndrome, doesn't it? Because we say,
Yes.
okay, that's done, tick, move on to the next thing, and focus on, well, what do I need to do better next time? Because this didn't work too well, this didn't work too well, and we don't step back and celebrate and say, hey, we got the business, or everybody loved the presentation.
Right. And people will say to me, "Well, it's not time to celebrate just yet. I won't celebrate until I've made it," right? Quote unquote. They'll say until I
Yeah.
made it. And I was like, "Well, what does that mean?" Until I've done that thing that I feel like I've made it. And I was like, "Well, that thing could be 10 years from now. So how do you not celebrate some of these small victories? Because it sustains you, right? It motivates you. It allows you to feel a genuine appreciation for yourself and pride. Like pride is an important thing to have. And as you said, not arrogance, not, lack of humility. Pride is a job well done. I really appreciate myself and providing some kindness to yourself. And I think we all need that, especially in these times, to be able to say, good job. Right? Like, yes, we want to get it externally validated, but and oftentimes it's important for us to validate it and reflect on it and to celebrate it and still continue to be ambitious because a lot of my clients will say, well, I don't want to celebrate because then I'll get lazy. And I'm like, that's not the kind of person you
Mm.
are. You're always going to want the next thing, but let's wait a minute before the next thing. Let's celebrate that promotion. Let's celebrate, you being able to launch your business. Let's celebrate some of these pieces before you go on to the next thing you're not doing well.
Hmm. Yeah, you talk about the imposter syndrome paradox, so tell us a little bit more about that, because you mentioned earlier about people that are highly successful are sometimes afraid to admit that they have this imposter syndrome, that they have an internal belief that they're not good enough, and that they'll be found out at any moment. And yet the paradox actually speaks a little bit against that.
Right. So oftentimes when we first started writing the book and we would talk to people about imposter syndrome, they would ask us this question. They're like, "Oh, is it like that movie Catch Me If You Can, like with DiCaprio and like Tom Hanks?" And it's like, no, that's totally someone who is an imposter. What we're talking about are people who are actually high achieving, who feel that they're a fraud and are not accomplished. So the paradox that we talk about are these highly successful people tend to feel like they are going to be exposed, that no one believes that they have earned what they've been able to do, and it causes them to work that much harder and never allows them to feel like they are successful. So that's the piece of the paradox of it are that the people who have imposter syndrome are far from actual imposters, right? Like they are the ones who are putting in the effort. They are the ones who are achieving. They are the ones who are overworking for the benefit of the organization or for their company. So that I think oftentimes is what we want to point out is that you are far from an imposter. You are an achiever and you are legitimate.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think Brené Brown talks a lot about this from the aspect of shame, right? And she's sort of very open about that. And then you look at Brené Brown and all the work she's done, all the content she's put out there, the contribution she's made to her subject areas, and the expertise she shared with the world, and the presentation she does, the confidence she exudes in those presentations, and yet she very clearly, self-admittedly, has imposter syndrome around being ashamed of things, or being touched negatively by criticism.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, I think that's a great example. I think the example that I cite is, former First Lady Michelle Obama, who, has achieved all these things. And she constantly talks about her imposter syndrome and feeling like maybe she shouldn't be in these rooms and still struggling with it to this day, but recognizing that she does belong and that it can pop up, but she manages it.
Mm. Yes, and I just heard clips of her speech at the Democratic National Convention, which was yesterday, our time as we're
Right.
recording this. So yeah,
Right. Yeah, it was
that's a
phenomenal.
timely example. Yeah, and
Yeah.
she's somebody. I mean, you've got to admire her presence, um,
Mm-hmm.
her character, yes, but the way she projects her character, the way she comes across, and the and she talked about empathy yesterday. And
Mm-hmm.
we won't. I'll steer clear of politics, but she talked about empathy, and I think she exudes empathy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
she speaks into the camera, and you feel as though she's there with you and speaking to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, on this topic of imposter syndrome, I think this aspect of empathy, and especially having empathy for yourself and others struggling with it, is so critical. And when we talk about being kind to ourselves, I think that's what we're trying to really project: is how are you able to allow yourself to make mistakes and not beat yourself up and not necessarily tear yourself down.
Hmm. All right. So, do you have any kind of quick tips for the listener in terms of, most of the conversations we have during the day are with ourselves, right? And
Right.
usually we're having those conversations when we're on our own, and it's often in those conversations, certainly my experience, where the thought pops up, I won't do that because I'm not good enough, or there's
Hmm.
all these other people have done stuff already, and I'll never measure up to that. And yet, I know full well with all the work I've done that I can do it differently. It doesn't need to be better. It just needs to be different. It has my personality and my particular perspective on it. And some people will resonate with that better than they will with the other things. And yet there's this voice going on in my head. Now, how can we kind of interrupt that pattern when there's nobody else around? We can't talk to somebody and say, I'd like to have a conversation. I'm having these thoughts. How can we kind of quickly short circuit it ourselves?
Right. So those thoughts in your head are what we call those automatic negative thoughts, right? So it's being able to label them as such and then be able to find a counter argument to them. So if you say, I'm not good enough, well, what is the data? What is the evidence? What is the particular automatic negative thought that's coming in? How do you then create what we call a positive tape that counters that argument? Because ultimately, that's what sustains imposter syndrome. As you said, most of the time we're with ourselves and with our thoughts, and those thoughts are the things that allow us to continue to feel like an imposter. So anytime those thoughts come in, you're able to monitor them and say, well, what is the data that suggests that? Typically, there is no data for that. And then what is the counter argument and the data that supports the opposite of it? So if you say, I'm not good enough, then you say, well, where's the data for that? There isn't any. What's the data that suggests you are good enough? The things that I've done, the accomplishments that I have, the ability to, launch these particular different initiatives. So it's always being able to counter that, because when we talk about it being automatic, it's like breathing, like these thoughts just
Mm.
flood you. And we're really trying to reprogram, in essence, and recondition your mind to have a much more positive and more accurate, quite honestly, assessment of who you are.
Mm. Yeah, I find asking questions like, well, what if I was good enough? Um, just sort of that simple question kind of changes the thought patterns in your unconscious,
Hmm.
and then you start to be in a better position to do what you're describing, to start to say, well, hang on the other side, I've done all these things, so this isn't that much different from that. So why shouldn't I succeed in this new initiative?
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm,
Always trying to give yourself that grace and give yourself that feedback that is accurate, right? So sometimes people say, well, what is it about this? Are you just trying to, give yourself positive affirmations and go through the day? And part of it is positive affirmations based on data, right? So it's not just giving platitudes that aren't
mm.
necessarily, deserved in that way. I think it's important to be able to recognize that there are plenty of opportunities and evidence that exist to show why you are worthy, why you are great, why you are striving in the ways that you have the particular talents to contribute to the world.
And when you say data there, I'm guessing you mean thinking back to experiences that were positive, things that you have achieved. So that comes back to the point you were making earlier about taking time to celebrate your achievements, and making sure you're actually aware of those and you're aware of your strengths.
Right. And I think this is so critical to really talking through that piece of it. So I work with clients who are entrepreneurs who will launch, a business, and you well know, right? Like what it takes to launch a business. There are different steps to the process. And sometimes it doesn't feel like until the business is profitable, you can, celebrate. But to me, it's being able to actually get to each stage of creating your business, having the idea and then constructing the process. There's celebration steps, celebratory pieces to it along the way that are so critical to sustaining you and feeling like, look, I can make this happen and can keep your motivation up. And I think that's something that I oftentimes talk through with my clients of being able to say, you never even thought you would get to this stage. And look at us here 6 months later, and you've launched your business. And yes, you haven't made a cent yet, but it's still important to recognize a lot of people can talk about an idea but can't bring it to fruition. So being able to celebrate that, I think, is so critical as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess it raises two questions for me there. I'll get on to the second one in a moment. That's feedback. But the first one is your measure of success.
Mm,
So, launching a business and then having a business be profitable there may be a time lapse between that, because initially, obviously, there's an investment in infrastructure, perhaps. There's certainly an investment in systems and processes, maybe software. There's investment of your time and energy in learning new things, and there's a whole lot of fees involved in setting up
hmm
the required registrations. And so there is, until you get the first customers that bring the cash flow that cover all those costs, you're not going to be profitable. So, but there's a whole lot of stuff you've learnt along that way. So, yeah, tell us a little bit more about how we can change our mindset a little bit, that what the measure of success there is. And this applies across the board, not just to business. I think that's a general principle. What's the measure of success? I mean, we look at, here's the end goal, but there's a journey involved to getting there. And is it reaching the end goal that's the measure of success and everything else is failure, or what?
hmm Yeah, and you well know, for many entrepreneurs, they will not unfortunately be successful. So I talk a great deal about the process of it. What are you learning in the process of it? How do you adopt growth mindset when you're making mistakes and missteps? We both can talk about some missteps we probably made in
Mm.
business and our different practices, but we've learned from them, right? Like there have been times where we've launched an initiative, thought it would be successful, and it totally bombed, and it still, to me, felt successful. Like I remember a while back, we decided we wanted to do some workshops to help other practitioners learn about how to launch their own practices. So we set up all these, different in-person workshops at the time, and sent out invitations and had this whole syllabus about how we were going to help them market and launch. And we launched it, and we had probably 3 people come, right?
Mm.
So we had rented this space out and we were super excited. And it made us realize that, well, wait a minute, maybe this wasn't the best modality. But in the process, what it also made us realize is we needed to make sure that all the fundamentals of our business were in place. So that allowed us to really redesign our website. It really allowed us to think about what are the services we really do want to focus in on, rather than being spread so thin. So to me, on the outside looking in, someone could say, well, that was a failure. Like, you didn't make any money. You actually lost money with some of these workshops. But when we looked at it a few years later, it really allowed us to be able to be who we are now, because we streamlined our business. We were able to really adapt to some of the changing needs of our clients. We recognized where our growth areas were, and we focused on that. So to answer that question, the measure of success for me is to, one, set out some short-term goals for yourself. Because if the long-term goal, oftentimes my clients will say, well, I want to make $1 million. That's my goal. And I say, okay, we all do. So over what period of time do you want that to happen? And then we get into the fundamentals of looking at, well, what would that take? What are you sacrificing? What are the short-term goals to get to that? How do you celebrate that? So being able to break down the process into these short-term, sometimes it's 3 to 6 months, sometimes it's 2 to 3 weeks, being able to recognize that along the way you're learning, you're growing, you're adapting, and seeing that as measures of success, not just the outcome.
Yeah, that's great. And so enjoying the journey and having some clear milestones that you can celebrate and also learn from. So second question that I had, and you kind of started to get into this one, is the idea of feedback and how we treat feedback. So you talked earlier about getting trusted peers and friends, family to give you feedback on what are your strengths and what do they appreciate about you. And you've talked just now about, the example of something where there was, by measure of financial success, it was a failure, but you learnt a lot from that. So how can we change our approach to feedback when people give us feedback that might be a little negative?
So I talk a great deal about the fact that feedback is something that we say intellectually we want, but emotionally we cannot necessarily deal with, right? That it's oftentimes one of those things where we're afraid to hear what someone else will say about us, right? And especially if you can imagine, if you have imposter syndrome, you feel like they're going to just tear you down. But what I talk about is when we approach things from this growth mindset of feedback allows us to really grow and understand where our areas of strength are, but also our areas for further development. And we may key in on areas for development, but I want you to focus on first the strengths. Like we tend to dismiss and disregard that. So back to this issue of yes, it will feel emotionally difficult to hear, but given the fact that we're not perfect and we have blind spots, being able, to your point earlier, of having the humility to say, it's all right for me to be able to put myself out there because it is a very vulnerable thing to be able to ask for that and honestly sit with it because you might want to initially explain it away, you might want to defend it. And being able to again get multiple sources of feedback. So if it's one person who's telling you something and everyone else isn't, then you have to kind of consider that. But if it's various people giving you the same consistent feedback, then that's something for you to process and then really kind of consider relative to moving forward in the ways that you work and the ways that you engage with others.
Hmm. Yeah, and that sort of feedback, I think, to me, it's a gift because there is that opportunity to learn and grow from that. I mean, what you do with it is your choice still.
Hmm.
Um, I guess the challenge, and I sort of always ask myself that if I've got unsolicited feedback, the challenge is always what's just simply gratuitous feedback of somebody that's making a like a personal attack, and
Hmm.
this happens a lot on the social media these days
Yes.
because people feel emboldened to do that sort of thing because they're sort of anonymous. It's not face
Hmm.
to face. The challenge that might come back as a result of that is going to be delayed and certainly not in person. Um, but on the other hand, there's also the feedback of somebody that will come to you and say, "Hey, when you did that, this bit didn't work too well. It kind of put me off a little bit, and here's how it made me feel, and this is why." And to me, that's a gift, that sort of feedback, because I can then reflect on that, and I can take ownership. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, and say instead of blaming that person for giving me that feedback, I can take ownership of that and say, well, what did I do to make you feel like that? And
Right.
why, why did you, you know, interpret it in that way? And how can I do it different that would make you feel the way I actually wanted you to feel?
Right. And it is a gift in that it allows you to really think about your blind spots because we all have a particular viewpoint and a vision that we bring to the world. And when we get feedback from people who care about us, it is from a place of caring to help us to grow and change. And to your point, we're getting feedback all the time, but especially in social media and that reality. But you want to always consider it, recognize the source of it, and then be able to process it. And how much of it you internalize will be based on the source, based on how well that person knows you and what you make of it. So you can feel defensive right away, but you want to be able to take a step back, reflect on it as you've talked about doing, and then being able to take away an element of how can this be useful to me? How
Mm,
can I take it in as much as it may be emotionally difficult to hear and to sit with? What can I do with it that would allow me to become a better person, to be a better, entrepreneur, to be a better executive, to be a better human?
Hmm. Yeah, that's great advice. And I think I'd add to that for all of us that do have imposter syndrome and suffer from that, that sort of feedback doesn't mean that you are an imposter or you've been found out. It's
Right.
actually it's a gift. It's a growth opportunity.
I think that is such an important point to make because oftentimes when you have imposter syndrome and you hear feedback, it's like, oh, there it is. I
Yeah.
told you, I finally found out. I knew they thought I was an idiot. I made a mistake. Now I'm going to get fired. Or everyone's talking about me saying that I don't know what I'm doing. It is not that. It's a moment in time that reflects a particular situation. It is not a broad generalization of you not being able to be good enough.
Hmm. Yeah, wonderful. Well, thanks, Richard. I could go on talking kind of mindset around imposter syndrome for ages, but I'll refer people to the book to
Yes.
find out a lot more. And I'm just cognizant of the time right now, and I think it's a good point now. On that note, to move on to the buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience, who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field, with some tips from your experience. So I've got 5 questions. Hopefully, you'll give us some really insightful answers that'll inspire the listener to go and do something awesome today as a result.
Okay, great. I'm
Yeah.
ready.
So, what's the number one thing you think anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
I think the number one thing is to be able to give yourself time to commit to reflecting on opportunities to innovate. And so that can sound, almost like, hey, that's common sense. But in the day to day that we live in, sometimes we are so fast moving, we don't build in the space to really think about the things that we want to pursue. We don't give ourselves room to have new ideas. We don't sit back and just reflect upon where the opportunities are. So making sure that you have that time commitment to reflection and research, I think, is critical.
Mm. Yeah, that's a interesting approach. Do you have any kind of structure to do that reflection?
Sure. So, for instance, every Sunday I take 2 hours out of the day and really think about some of the things that are happening with the business, some of the areas that I might be excited about pursuing, and then I write it down. Right.
Mm.
So I may either write it down in a journal, I may type it up on my laptop, I may put it in my phone. So any type of time that I have, I know Sundays, my wife and my kids know Daddy's going to go off into his reflection land for a couple of hours to really be able to just spend time on things that I want to work on or really kind of think a little bit more about. And so that's my strategy, kind of reflection time. If you don't have that time, like 2 hours of block time, at least even if you take 15, 20 minutes, and as I said, you can write something in the notes on your smartphone and say, well, what are some things that if I had some wild ideas or imaginations that my business could do or that I wanted to pursue, what would they be? And just giving yourself the opportunity without judgment to let ideas flood through. And then you will revisit them and look at some of them and discard a good deal of them. But a good deal of them, you'll be surprised, will stick. And they will provide you opportunities to really be able to pursue things you may not necessarily have considered because you just don't have the time for it because you're either trying to work on your business, keeping it afloat or grow, or you are, at your job trying to advance in your leadership position.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think writing down those ideas as you get them is really good, because often I find I come back to things I've written down like that. Sort of one thought pops into my head, I write it down somewhere. It sort of needs some time. It's kind of a wild thought right then and there, but later on I come back to it and it triggers something else, and that might lead to something there.
I mean, I've got pieces of papers from like airplane rides where I'm just sitting on a napkin, just writing something comes to me. So, don't take that for granted, being able to give time to that.
Great. All right. Now, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
So I would say that I take risks. That ultimately the story that I told you about, developing these workshops that didn't necessarily go the way that I wanted to, it was a risk. It wasn't tried. We kind of assessed it from a particular moment. We developed, if you will, a minimal viable product enough to say, let's test it out. So
Mm,
being able to test ideas out, take risks that are calculated and reasonable, but really putting it out there in the world to really understand, will it work? Like if it's an idea that I love, but it doesn't sell because people are not necessarily either ready for it or open to it, that's how I learned. So being able to feel like you have room to take risks are one of the ways that, I tend to innovate and grow.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, that's a great strategy. And, but the imposter syndrome is going to really be a barrier to that. If you've got really strong imposter syndrome, you're probably going to be very risk averse, right?
Yeah. And this is the challenge, right? Because someone with imposter syndrome does not want failure because failure indicates that they're fully exposed. They want perfection.
Hmm.
So in working through the imposter syndrome, it's saying from that growth mindset, this is an opportunity that you've taken. You're knowing that you have a particular skill set and you want to assess it. If it doesn't go well, it doesn't mean that you're a failure. It means that that particular element or initiative was not successful, but it's not an indictment of
Hmm.
who you are as a whole. So it's separating that outcome from who you are as a whole and constantly giving yourself that messaging to be able to overcome that level of risk aversion that you might have.
Yeah, yeah. And coming back to your example of the workshop you talked about, I mean, you talked about running it as a minimum viable product. You could have spent 10 times the amount of time preparing it and getting everything right, all dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's, and still have only 3 people turn up, right?
Right.
Because
Yeah, we could.
it was
Right.
the wrong. It wasn't what that market needed, or it wasn't the right time.
Hmm. Right. But I wouldn't have known that until I tried it.
Mm,
And I was keen to try it because we had gotten feedback from a lot of practitioners that they weren't sure how to grow their practice. So it was, hey, let's take this moment, and maybe it was the price point, maybe it was the timing, maybe it was, we didn't market it long enough, but it gave us an opportunity to test it out enough to recognize where we needed to go next.
great. All right. What's a favorite resource you use most often?
So, oddly enough, when I talk about, resources, the two things that I talk about, which can be counterintuitive, are uh, for time management, it's this Pomodoro technique. So, being able to
Mm,
do these time blocks. So, the Pomodoro technique is a time blocking technique where you take 25 minutes to do a particular task, give yourself a 5-minute break, and then go through 4 of those Pomodoros and then take a half an hour break. So this technique especially was designed for people initially with ADHD, but in the world we live in now where our attention can lag and when we sometimes feel like we need 3-hour blocks to do something,
mm,
it allows us to break it down into bite-sized portions to really feel like one, focus our efforts so that we don't get distracted, and then two, allow us to see that we're making progress even if we don't have a full 3 or 4 hour block at any given time. And then the other resource that I just talk about personal front is just meditation, right? So I talk about meditation as a resource that I've used to be innovative, to reflect, to really have an opportunity to give myself more of that space and time to let my mind wander and to come up with other opportunities to, emerge based on things that I might want to pursue.
mm. Yeah, well, it sounds like the meditation certainly fits in really well with the first couple of answers you've given us, and there's lots of different ways to do that, aren't there? I mean, you can. Uh, I'm guessing when you use the term that maybe you practice it in the conventional sense.
Right. And so I do something called coherence breathing from this book called The Healing Power of the Breath. And so it is in that conventional sense.
Mm,
I have a practice, like a 45-minute meditation breathing practice that I do every morning to kind of center myself and get ready for the day, but also use it as an opportunity to think about things that, may float in my mind that I don't necessarily have the opportunity to think about once the workday gets started.
great. And I love the Pomodoro technique. I sort of work in time blocks, and I have I break things down into 1, 3, and 5. 1 is the big thing I need to get done today. 3 are the sort of the medium things, and 5 are the little things. And I work on that system because then I can, if I get the one big thing done and nothing else, I can still celebrate that one big thing. So,
That, that's
but
perfect.
yeah, but the where I use the Pomodoro technique, it's not for kind of keeping my attention on something. It's more for breaking my attention because often I'll do the one big thing and I won't have an endpoint in where I want to
Ah,
get to today.
Right.
So it's like, work on this customer project rather than achieve these bits of that customer project. And so the day, if I'm not careful, the day will go by. I'll be working, very efficiently on that customer project, but then I'll get to the end of the day and say, oh, actually, I did want to get a few other things done today, and now I'm out of
Right.
time. So I
Right.
find the
Right.
Pomodoro technique works really well there, because that'll interrupt me there, and I'll say, okay, where's my endpoint for this particular task, so that I can go on and get the other things done as well.
Right. That's perfect. That's perfect.
Okay, now what's the best way to keep a client on track?
So I talk a good deal about having accountability. So talking through and always having clear tasks and goals to meet. So for clients, it's being able to, whether it's my executive coaching clients or my actual, organizational consulting clients, being able to map out clear goals and saying with timelines and say, okay, let's check in a week's time, let's check in X amount of time, and knowing that they have that built-in accountability causes them to feel like, yeah, I do need to respond. So some of them will say, oh yeah, I knew I was meeting with you today, so I had to, last night kind of get to some of these things that I spent the whole week not doing, but I then got to it because I knew that I had this meeting with you and we had a particular task you wanted me to complete.
Yeah, the accountability is pretty powerful, isn't it?
Yes.
Mm. Okay, what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
It's to really be able to understand what your specific niche is and be able to really leverage it. So oftentimes I talk about the space again. I'm a psychologist. And when I talk with other psychologists oftentimes and say, well, what is your specialty? 9 times out of 10 people say depression and anxiety. So that does not cause you to differentiate. Me being able to say as a psychologist that I do career and executive coaching immediately differentiates me from the vast majority of psychologists who may have practices. And as densely populated as New York City it is, there's a lot of therapists and psychologists. But understanding what it is that you actually enjoy doing, what is it that you might wish to specialize in. Sometimes we're told, well, we need to just be generalists because you don't want to dissuade any particular client from finding you. The reality is you want to be able to stand out through differentiation. So someone says, you know what, that person knows what I need and that person will solve my problem because he or she, that language that, I see from their website or I see in their talks really speaks to me in that way. So they get me. So being able to leverage that niche is really incredible and important.
Yeah, and that's wonderful advice. And of course, my regular listeners will know that that's pretty much our philosophy of marketing. Obsessing over the specific people who you can help and who are a really good fit for you, and niching right down into the smallest kind of sustainable business model that you can.
Yes,
Mm.
definitely.
Now, that may mean people, that may mean subject matter, that may mean geographical area. There's different ways to
Hmm.
do that, right?
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
It's really being able to know exactly where you want to work, who you want to target, where you want to target to be able to get to that level.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for this, Richard. This has been really fabulous. Now, where can people find out more about you, get the book, and maybe even get in touch to say thanks for what you've shared with us today?
Okay, great. So they can get the book from any bookseller. So Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, IndieBound. It's called Own Your Greatness, Overcome Impostor Syndrome, Beat Self-Doubt, Succeed in Life. If you want to catch up with me, I am on Instagram at Dr. Rich Orbe-Austin, on Twitter at Dr. R. Orbe-Austin. And then finally, you can check out my website, Dynamic Transitions LLP, as in Paul.com. All different ways for you to see my work, to connect with me, to read the book, to kind of give us feedback. So I'll be excited to hear from you all.
Great, thanks. And we'll have links to all of those on the show notes and links to the book as well. So, do you have some parting advice for our listener today?
So my parting advice to the listeners today, and clearly the fact that they're listening to this knows that they are making an investment in the time and effort to really think about how to grow. is to make sure you're consistently connecting and building your networks. So recognizing even in this age of COVID, a good deal of people say, well, it feels awkward to do this in the virtual space. Understanding where the opportunities come from are always fascinating to me, because some of the typical marketing techniques that we use may be useful, but I'm always surprised at how opportunities emerge just through some networking that I may not have necessarily wanted to, follow through on. So someone reaching out to me and wanting to chat, or me speaking at some event that was last minute, but being able to cultivate that and take time and make room for that in your busy schedule is so critical at all times, to continue to grow, to continue to innovate, to meet people who may be doing similar things to you, but meet people who may be doing things that are different, so that you're enabling yourself to learn more and also to have people learn about you.
Yeah, that's great advice. And one of the great benefits of this podcast is I get to meet so many different people and grow my network. And it's there's lots of amazing people like you that are spread all around the world. I'm not limited geographically, which is the wonderful thing now. For those people that in the past had built their networks just by in-person meetings, which they now can't have, this opportunity to get online with video conferencing of whatever nature it is, you can meet people all across the world in all different walks of life, from different countries with different perspectives, and grow your network like that. And I've participated in quite a number of networking events online over the last couple of months, and it's led to some amazing opportunities and amazing connections. So yeah, really great advice. All right. Now, finally, who's someone else I should get on this podcast for a conversation, and why?
Sure. So one of the colleagues that I actually spoke to recently on an IG Live that I did, his name is Sheldon Shaw. He is a creative. So he is someone who's a screenwriter. He is a writer. He's a playwright. But he's someone who really can speak to these issues of creativity and innovation, especially in this age of COVID. And so I think he'd be a great guest to be able to share his thoughts about some of the challenges folks, especially creative people, are facing in these times, and how to innovate, and some of the things that your listeners would want to think about in terms of how to continue to cultivate creativity and motivation to do so in these moments. So Sheldon Shaw would be the person that I'd recommend.
Wonderful. We'll reach out to Sheldon, maybe get an introduction from you, and have him on the show to have a conversation as well.
Sure.
Well, thanks so much, Richard. I really appreciate you spending time with us today and having this conversation, elaborating on the book. And as I say, it's really opened my eyes to a whole lot of things, even though I believe I've done quite a bit of work on my own imposter syndrome, but it's still there. And, there's other triggers that I perhaps haven't recognized in the past that you've kind of alerted me to now. So thanks for that. Thanks for explaining a lot of different things related to imposter syndrome today. And I wish you all the best for the future, and let's stay in touch.
Yes, most definitely. Thank you, Jürgen, so much for being able to provide this opportunity. It was such a joy to connect with you and your listeners. So I'm so excited to continue to stay in touch.
Thanks. I hope you enjoyed that insightful and inspiring conversation with Richard and took something away from his episode. The book Own Your Own Greatness has had a profound impact on me, and I really appreciated the opportunity to dig deeper into some of the concepts with one of the authors. I'd love to know what you took away from Richard's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Richard Orbe-Austin. That is RichardOrbeAustin. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Richard Orbe-Austin. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Richard there, as well as links to the Dynamic Transitions website, the book Own Your Greatness, his social media pages, and the other resources we spoke about in our conversation today. Richard suggested that we have a conversation with playwright, screenwriter, and Kennedy Center fellow Sheldon Shaw on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So Sheldon, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast courtesy of Richard Orbe-Austin. And tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got yet more fantastic guests lined up, including Rebecca Arbona of Brand True and buyer's agent Kitty Parker. Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the show to be reminded of new episodes. It's free to subscribe. Leave a review if you like. Even if you don't like me, I'm okay with that. I'm asking you to leave a review because it helps other people find this show. Go to innovabiz.co to join our marketing transformation community and access a free gift my team and I made for you. It's the Marketing Master Mini Class. We want to give you everything you need to transform your marketing into a human-centered, relationship-focused growth engine. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.